but supply of money shrinks. So it means what? People run out of liquidity. How do people get enough liquidity? Yeah, you remember portfolio, people's portfolio, money, bonds. So if you need liquidity, you remember we assume that basically in this economy, wealth is fixed. So wealth is fixed. So if you need more liquidity, you have to sell your bonds. People need liquidity, so they tend to sell bonds. When everybody is trying to sell bonds, price of bonds falls, interest rate rises, investment falls, so planned expenditure falls, inventory levels rise. Okay, actually here I had a little bit of space. Output falls back to volleyball. You see, here I ran out of space. So here economy goes to boom, output above. Actually I wrote it here. Output in short run is above volleyball. So here output goes back to volleyball. So here unemployment falls below natural rate of unemployment, and here economy goes back to unemployment goes back to UN. You see that? Does that make sense? Everything? So, you see? Economy never stays in short run. It always goes back to long run. Okay? But this is something I call. That is what I call, okay? So I call this if nobody intervenes here, because we are going to see intervention in a few minutes. Economy, nature, I call it nature. Nature brings economy back to full employment. Is that right? But nature knows only one thing, how to take economy back to full employment. What is that? Price level. If you leave it to nature, nature knows only one thing, changing price. How does economy, for example, change price and bring economy back to full employment here? Boom. So boom and recession are things that nature knows how to create and how change price level. Okay, so you will see in a few minutes, you may want to intervene that and keep economy at full employment. Okay, so avoid, you remember the macroeconomics objectives are keeping economy at full employment. Okay, so here we deviate from full employment. Therefore, we are going to touch about policy making in a few minutes. But again, here no policy making. So if economy has a shock, a policy, any change, so economy takes a system to the boom, to the recession, depending on case, and change price level, bring economy to full employment. Okay, so you remember I may ask a question like that in final exam. So now help me with this, guys. So forget about A. Compare initial and new long-run equilibrium. So output is what? Output would be overall. Sorry? Sorry? Yeah, the same. Exactly. You see, we go to boom and we go. You see, long-run equilibrium by definition means by what? Is that right? So output must be fixed. Consumption would be fixed. Is that right? Why? Because output is fixed, income is fixed, tax is fixed, disposable income is fixed. So consumption is fixed. Yes?
I have a question. Within short, when output goes up, the consumption goes up. But why output goes down?
That's I didn't notice that. Again, possibly I ran out of space. Here, yeah, that's a good point. So she's right. Actually, I forgot. Here you have to write what? Consumption goes down. Okay, yeah, add that. Actually, yes, sometimes mostly because in my slides, I am under space pressure. Okay, so actually I am going to show you in future slides, I have the same problem because lack of space, I forget some of this. A good one. Okay. Yes.
So the longer with consumption, we like fall out of order.
No, actually no. No, consumption would be here.
Oh.
Is that right? Because it's right after income. So yeah, put it here, consumption. Okay, consumption the same. How about investment? Investment. Investment. You see here, investment rises, investment falls. It looks like ambiguous, is that right? I mean, how do we know? What happens to investment? Actually, some people say going back to graph, interest rate goes back to the same. So here, interest rate falls, interest rate rises. It looks like ambiguous. Is that right? But from graph point of view, interest rate goes back to original level. Okay. But I told you the trick. During the exam, you are under pressure. Time pressure, anxiety. If you have a problem like that, you remember what my professor taught me. So I'm teaching you. You see, that's why I wrote a S curve. Okay, because you can write these things separately. Y, C, I, G, R, P separately. Is that right? You discuss that. But I recommend you to do this because in this way, if you are not sure about investment, so what do you do? Okay, forget about that. So what happens to G? What happens to G? No change, because remember G is up to me. I didn't change G. So G would be fixed. But if G is fixed, C is fixed, left hand side is fixed, what does that mean? It means investment must be fixed. You see that? So if you got confused during the exam, that is helpful. And then what happens to interest rate, real interest rate? You see? Because investment is fixed, so remember, it looks like ambiguous. Interest rate falls, interest rate rises, so overall they cancel each out. How do I know? Because I just showed you that investment is fixed, so interest rate must be fixed. So here you go. So what happens? What happens to price level? Price level goes up for sure. See here? Price goes down. Now, did you see this, guys? This may look innocent, but this is a very big deal. This is one of the biggest outcomes in macroeconomic theory. Actually, you are familiar with that. We talked about this in chapter 5. Okay, what is this? Look at here. No, we talked about this before. One more time. This represents neutrality of money. What did neutrality of money say? Neutrality of money says, look at that. Monetary policies cannot affect real variables in the long run. You cannot change real variables in the long run by money supply. Can you see that? Or, so you see, money is neutral in the long run. So, or you can say this. Actually, again, this is not new because you should remember this from chapter 5. You remember in chapter 5, I showed you that growth rate of money supply determines inflation rate. So as you can see, in the long run, money supply only affects price level, nothing else. Did you see that? Growth rate of money. Okay, so you should remember from chapter 5. Or different presentation of neutrality of money. So neutrality of money or classical dichotomy. Classical dichotomy. Okay, so you see, what is classical dichotomy? The same idea. The same idea, okay, but different expression. So classical dichotomy means two parts, okay? Classical dichotomy says economy is including two parts. Real side of economy, nominal side of economy. Real side of economy is including everything real. Everything real. Real output, real consumption, real investment, real government, real interest rate. Did you see that? And the nominal side of economy is including nominal values. Nominal GDP, nominal consumption, nominal interest rate. So, the classical dichotomy says money supply cannot affect real side of economy. So, real side of economy, nominal side of economy from money supply point of view, they are separate. Money supply can affect only nominal side of economy, including price level. Real side is not affected. Actually, it makes sense. At the end of the day, by the way, you see, in short run, it can affect everything. Do you see that? In long run. And what does that mean? It makes sense intuitively. It says at the end of the road, printing money is, you cannot change something real, okay, by printing money. Because printing money is what? More paper, more ink, fast printer, is that right? So how can you make something out of nothing? How can you make output, more output by printing money? Okay, in short run, yeah. And you remember the chapter that says agri-supply curves offers sloping. So over there, you will see printing money can confuse people. That's why you get more output. But when confusion goes away, so nothing is changing at the end. Okay, so this is something, as you can see, this is the most fundamental idea in economics, macroeconomics, economics. But you may not believe that sometimes people with PhDs ignore that. I mean, not ignore that. I mean, they forget about that when in real life when they apply it. Okay, don't forget that. In long run, printing money or in long run, price is only function of what? Money supply. Remember in chapter 5, I proved this. You remember chapter 5? Long run. That long run, we showed what? Inflation rate is equal to growth rate of money supply. You remember that? You see? If you print 5% per year, more money, inflation rate would be exactly 5%. Okay? So, very important. Very important, but sometimes people just ignore it. Okay? Okay, I talked about policies, fiscal policies, monetary policies. Let's work on shocks. Okay, actually, we are familiar with shocks. Like we talked about this consumer surplus. So, I was teaching microeconomics. So, consumer sentiment, consumer confidence index, or investors' sentiment, investors' confidence. If investors become pessimistic about future of economy, if consumers become pessimistic about future of economy, they cut back their consumption. They cut back their investment. Is that right? We talked about this. I showed you actual rates. Okay, so you see here. So these two are among consumer and investors' sentiment are among the most popular shocks. Okay. So actually this graph shows, you see consumer sentiment index, you see? This is what? As you can see, variables, so here I have consumption, but we focus mostly on durable consumption. You already talked about this chapter. Was it chapter 2? Consumption, durable goods, non-durable goods, and services. You know, non-durable goods like food, people need to consume food anyway. But consumer sentiment mostly affects consumption of durables. For example, if I am not sure about future of economy, I might lose my job. I am not going to vacations, all right? I am not ordering new furniture. I have to eat food anyways, all right? Can you see it here? So as you can see, consumption, durable consumption mostly. Investment, they are moving by consumer sentiment. And this is what? This is the period, the most famous and the most recent recession, that people call it Great Recession. So people tell you that that was 2008, 2009. Possibly you don't remember that. No, you possibly heard about that, yeah. So I remember I was teaching this course during that time. Oh my God, I have so many memories about that. Just let me tell you one. So I was teaching here during the break. One of the students came here and he started crying. I said, why are you crying? He said, I lost all my money. Unbelievable. I said, okay, what did you do? And he said, so if you can double check, something called Citigroup. He said, I bought Citigroup, each share, I forgot, $70, $80, $100 per share, and we checked, and he was crying, and we checked with my cell phone on him. You know, it was $5. He had paid 100, roughly, I forgot, 80 or what. And by the way, that $5 could be zero, because other banks went bankrupt and it became zero. That $5, and I went and investigated why 5, why not zero? You know that when the first few banks went bankrupt in US, then the US government started bailing out banks. So Citigroup was lucky because US government paid them billions of dollars. And it's very funny, we did that. So amount of money that government gave Citigroup divided by total shares was 5. So it means without government payment, so it was absolutely zero. And you know, I tried to give comfort to the student. So it was very bad. It was very bad. So consumer confidence, the green line, was, I mean, the lowest ever recorded until then. Okay, so as you can see, so there are shocks. Can you see it here? So that was for US. This was for Canada. So I said investment went down, export went down, and you know that for Canada, export is important because Canada, you know, we talked about it. Canada is what? A small economy. Very well. Chapter 6, we talked about that. So, but for US, it's not very important. I told you, when I was your age, I took my first macro class. Generally, they assumed that there was no open economy in my courses, in my macro classes. So there was none. I mean, so the guy who won Nobel Prize for Open Economy, that if we have time, we are going to talk about that. So he was a Canadian economist. My own professor, he won Nobel Prize because he created open economy macro that we teach, and you saw the long-run version of that. Okay, so you see, export went down. So you can say, oh, the stock market. Actually, I have that. The stock market, Canadian stock market, look at that. It crashed. That was horrible. People lost their money. So, your consumer confidence, investors, You see, when we have shock, I told you, and we are going to see that. If you leave economy alone, economy is adjusting itself back to new full employment. But it is requiring what? Boom or recession. Can you see that? So this is how nature does it. Okay? But as we are going to talk about that, governments are intervening to reduce the pain. Reduce the pain. Your brother, the student was so because in US, for example, I just remember Lehman Brothers. We can double check. Lehman Brothers was a bank that it went to bankrupt. It became bankrupt without government intervention. So Lehman Brothers was like a 250-year bank. And the government didn't do anything. But because nobody believed that Lehman Brothers could go back. But when that happened, US government intervened and bailed out, pretty much gave banks free money. Essentially, okay? Other ones, okay? So, so we are going to talk about intervention. Intervention in this course, we always do what? One policy at a time. You remember G, T, M, but in reality, don't forget that in reality we do everything at the same time. Okay? Okay? But that if you want to do everything together, it's missing. Okay, so we do one. So, for example, when we go to the recession, so if you want to intervene, intervention rule is very simple. Leaning against the wind. Okay, so if economy is going to recession, so government has to apply what? Expansionary policies. If economy goes to boom, contractionary policies. Okay, so during the famous case, so increase in G. So increase in G. Canadian government increased G by $40 billion. Tax cut by $20 billion. Is that? And also expansion in monetary policy. Expansion in monetary policy. So you see, expansion in monetary policy is what? I just showed you. Expansion in monetary policy reduces what? Reduces interest rate. Reduces interest rate. And then, was it chapter 4 or 5? You remember we talked about overnight rates, central bank money supply. So as you can see, look at that. Money supply went out a lot, but generally, central bank, announcements are in terms of interest rate because people understand interest rate better than money supply. Okay. For example, these days I am trying to renew my mortgage. So mortgage rate is depending on central bank interest rate. But if they tell me central bank increased the money supply by $100 billion, okay, what does that mean? Okay, so that's why here I am showing your overnight rate controlled by central bank. As you can see, during great recession and after for so many years after that, pretty much zero. So in Canada, it didn't become zero. It became 0.25%, 0.25%, pretty much zero. Is that right? But in US, it became zero, absolutely zero. And in Europe, the funny thing here is they made this interest rate negative. I always told the students in my classes there is no such thing as negative interest rate, but it happened. It happened. Why? Because you remember we talked about money. So central banks have to loan out. You remember that? When central bank increases money supply, you remember how it works? Central bank gives money, cash, and cash are deposited and they loan. So during that time, because banks were scared, they didn't loan out. So even government give them, central bank give them free money, they didn't give it to more people. Okay, so that's why negative means what? They started punishing. Okay, they gave them free money, but if they didn't give it to people, so anyway, almost zero. I mean, zero interest rate. So expansionary what? G, expansionary T, expansionary M, all together. Okay, of course, from graphical point of view, it's messy. We do one policy at a time. So in fact, one thing that happened during that time was that instead of money supply targeting, Central Bank of Canada and many central banks across the world, so they started interest rate targeting. Interest rate targeting. So interest rate targeting means what? They said, okay, we want to make interest rate zero. How much? We keep increasing money supply until we get that. You remember central bank buys bonds? They realize that buying bonds doesn't make interest rate zero. Okay, they round. So that was first time in my life central bank started buying stocks, private stocks. So car companies. So during that time, essentially some people believe that government becomes the biggest shareholders of companies because there is nothing left that government can buy. Is that right? They bought everything. So they open up, they gave them a right to buy. You know, generally they buy only government bonds. But they started buying corporate bonds. They shouldn't do that, but during the rough time, that is so to make interest rate zero. So why? I mean, and here there's a question. There's a question that says, is it better to target interest rate or money supply? Okay. So this chapter, question 8, is talking about which one is better. Interest rate targeting is better or money supply targeting is better. Okay. It depends. It depends on if the shock is coming from IS or it's coming from LM. Okay? So interest rate targeting is better if shocks are coming from goods market, IS curve. And I told you, during 2009, 2008, 2009 recession, mostly it came from consumer and producer sentiment. So people didn't cut back their consumption, cut back their investment. Okay, remember, IS shifted, and I am going to shift in a few minutes. IS, consumer. So when shocks are coming from IS, goods market, interest rate targeting is more helpful. So please take a look at question 8, solutions in your tutorial exercises. It tells you why in terms of graphs. Okay, let's investigate that, guys. Suppose consumer sentiment goes down. Sometimes be careful. Final exam, I mean, we may call that consumer pessimism. Consumer pessimism is when consumer sentiment goes down. Consumer optimism means consumer sentiment goes up. Okay. Okay. So okay, let's see again. Let's see what happens. Okay. So you remember this shock shifts consumption function. We talked about that. Consumers at any level of disposable income, consumers consume less. Okay, so that would be leftward shift in IS. Is that right? And also, you remember experiment, we have done this before, so it shifts aggregate demand to the left. Is that right? So, as you can see, point A is short-term equilibrium, output falls below full employment, so it means economy goes to recession. And we saw that. Okay? So we So that. Now, as you can see, when consumer confidence falls at any price level, consumers don't buy that much. Okay, so it means firms cannot sell as much as before. Okay, so they have to do what? They have to put back their output in inventory levels. So inventories are growing, so they cut back their consumption. It's like their output. So output falls below full employment. Recession, all right? Recession. So you know what happens when you have recession? Y is less than Y bar, is that right? Y is less than Y bar. So what happens? So price start going where? Is that right? Resolution? Okay. Here. When price gradually falls, so it means what? So you see, one more time, M over P, M is fixed, price goes down, supply of real money rises. So supply of real money rises, it means what? LM here gradually keeps down. Okay? How far down? This far. Is that right? So you go back to full employment. You see, this is what I call nature. If you leave the solution to nature, I told you, nature does know only one thing, changing price level. Here, price has to go down. How can price go down by nature? This is how nature creates recession. See that? Recession. Is that right? So let's go through the details. You see, I guess by now, if you put together these cases, you can see these cases 99% equal, similar. Is that right? So very similar to each other. Okay, so you don't need to worry about that. So if you get what really the idea behind this stuff and you do enough exercise, so they're so similar. Okay, so you can handle any other cases. So for final exam, as I told you for midterm test, you should not be overwhelmed by the question. Not by the question, by the story of the question. You have to translate the question to what shift in IS or LM, is that right? IS can go to the right, to the left, and M can go up or down. So it means you have overall 4 cases. You don't have 1 million cases. Is that right? So all stories in the world translated can be translated into 4 cases. Okay, so short run. Lower consumer sentiment means what? Consumption falls. Can you see that? This is the touching point where the shock hits the economy. So here, consumption falls, planned expenditure falls, inventories rise. Why? Because you have excess supply. Okay? So, and finally, output falls. When output falls, your demand for money falls. Demand for money falls, it means what? People end up with extra liquidity in their pocket that they don't need. So what happens? When you have extra liquidity and you don't want to purchase anything, what do, guys? Can you tell me? Remember, how do you change your portfolio? You have liquidity in your pocket, you don't need that. Yeah, you buy bonds. Remember, liquidity versus return. When liquidity, you don't need that much liquidity. You try to increase. You try to get return. So people buy bonds. Okay. If everybody tries to buy bonds, bonds become more expensive. Interest rate falls. Investment rises. So also. Because output rises, the output falls, unemployment rises. Did you see that? So this is recession. Again, I didn't have a space here, so you can say falls below if you want to be perfect, below Y bar, so rises above U and above yuan. Is that right? This is recession. Okay, what happens in the long run? In the long run, it's easy. Remember, because y is less than y bar in the short run, so price start going down. Is that right? Remember prescription. So let me get rid of this stuff. So price gradually decreases over time. The real money supply rises this time. So it means gradually people have extra liquidity. So people buy bonds, price of bonds rises, interest rate goes down. You see, interest rate goes down twice. Interest rate goes down, where was it? Oh, here and here. So investment goes up twice. Investment here, investment here. Investment rises, investment is part of planned expenditure. So excess demand, inventory levels start falling. So, okay, actually I wrote it here because here I had a space. So output income goes back to Y bar, unemployment falls back to UM. Yes, everyone? Actually, here we have a new phenomenon, okay? It's called self-fulfilling prophecy. Did I mention this before? You see? So, what was the question here? The question here is, people became pessimistic about future of economy. Is that right? Suppose, of course this is not true, but it could be sometimes. Suppose people were pessimistic about future of the economy for no reason. I am talking about the worst scenario. Can you see that? So, no reason. But did you see what happened? People became pessimistic about future of the economy. So they says, oh, maybe a recession is arriving for no reason. Okay, but you see, but recession really happened. That's the problem. Self-fulfilling prophecy means if expectations, if people have some sort of expectations, I don't know, fortunately or unfortunately, those expectations materialize, happen, they happen. Can you see that? And then you can tell your friend, I told you last year that economy is in bad shape. No, economy was not in the bad shape. You made it that way. Can you see that? So expectations have this self-fulfilling prophecy, self-fulfilling force. Okay. In this course, we are not going to use it that much, but again, CO6, there is one whole chapter how you can control inflation. You know that. This is something that people have been using in these economies, I mean, in the past couple of years. So why fighting with inflation is so difficult? Because remember, in this course, you learned one thing. Inflation rate is equal to growth rate of money supply. If that is really true, in order to reduce inflation, you have to reduce growth rate of money supply, and that is on the hands of central bank. Yeah, you remember that? So how come, in reality, fighting with inflation is so difficult and costly, but from theory, it's like that, okay? But don't forget that theory is for long run. In short run, expectations matter. So if people expect inflation, fighting with inflation becomes very costly because of that thing. So in this course, we are not going to discuss that. If you take CO6, they touch about that and they show you why fighting with inflation is so costly. And it's mostly because of this. Because central bank can control printing money. But how can you control expectations? That's a $1 million question because of that. Self-fulfilling prophecy, if expectations are against you, no policy is working, okay? And you are doomed. Okay, so that causes cost. Okay. So look at here. This is nature. Yes. So if people have expected recession, for example, remember pessimism. Okay. So this happens. Is that right? So you go to recession and then you go back to full employment, and that is very costly. It's very painful. You have like Great Depression, Great Recession. Okay, going to recession and coming back is generally. Let me tell you one thing for policy making: price adjustment in economics, especially in macroeconomics, is a long, bloody, painful process. Because you remember here it was very easy. I tell you, price has to go down, price has to go. But okay, that is easy on paper. But you remember what was P? That was aggregate price. That GDP deflator is including 1 million prices. Price going up, going down. In practice, it's not that easy because you know, so many different prices have to go up, go down. So that is very painful, long process. So you, from policy making point of view, you have to avoid price adjustment as much as possible. That's not easy, costly. It would be costly. Okay. So many people, many economists believe that when we have a shock, remember I assume that government doesn't do anything. Nature only works. Okay, but some economists believe that no, that's bad idea. We can cut that long, bloody process. Okay, make it shorter. Okay, so by what? By policy intervention. By policy intervention. Again, if you take CO6, there is one whole chapter that is debating this idea. Should government intervene or government shouldn't intervene? That's a big chapter. They talk about that because some economists believe that. You heard about Milton Friedman. So he always said he was against. He died a few years ago. So he was the biggest enemy of government interventions in the economy. He I don't know. He was kind of extreme. He believes that Great Depression was created by central bank. That extreme. So he said government interventions make life more difficult. So you remember stabilization policies? We talk about stabilization policies to keep economy at full employment. But he said stabilization policies are more destabilizing. Okay, and in that chapter in CO6 there are pro and cons. Okay. For policy intervention, okay? So my point here is, it's not very straightforward street, okay? But here I assume that we are intervening, okay? But what can we do? What can we do? So suppose, again, remember, G, T, M. In reality, we do all three, but let's do one at a time. One at a time. So guys, if consumer pessimism hits the economy, so what can government do? Government can apply increase in G, okay, keep economy, keep S curve at the same place. So if that is the case, output remains at full employment and price remains the same, is that right? So you see, long-run equilibrium remains at the same point. Okay? So of course, this is fantastic, but this is too good to be true. Okay, you need that chapter. And I don't want to discuss that chapter here, but just to give you an idea, you see, this has two problems. Again, I am referring to that chapter, you can see the future. One is government should have a crystal ball to see when the shock hits. Okay, so over there they discuss that generally we don't become aware of shocks until 1 year, 2 years after the shock. Can you see that? So government doesn't see. We see everything with a lag. So when you see something in a lag, when you feel recession, that is the news from 2 years ago. Is that right? So your policy is not compatible. Your policy is imposed today. And number two, that you need right size G. You see? So you need to know how much shock you got. So G must be the same size. Because, for example, if you apply less G, you don't go out of recession. And if you apply more G, so you end up with what? Inflation. So you know that after COVID, we got what? Inflation. Higher interest rate that they are still going on today. Why? Because of too much fiscal policies, too much monetary policies during COVID. Okay? Another problem. Right size G, how do we know? How do we know the size of that? Because we don't have all these nice graphs in reality. Okay? But anyway, here we ignore that, okay? We assume that government is so smart, can see everything, okay? So what happens? So you have O and B, we compare. Y is the same, C goes down because people are pessimistic. I is the same because interest rate remains the same. Can you see that? G goes up. G goes up. So you see the rule of stabilization policy is very simple. Leaning against the wind. If you have pessimism, so any part of demand goes down, you have to increase another part of demand, because total must be the same. Total demand must remain the same, because total output is the same. Okay, so what's wrong with fiscal policies? Fiscal policies, you see, when you increase G, it means you are running deficit. And deficit is very big problem. Okay, because government has to borrow. Government debt goes to the roof. Okay. But the good aspect of that is interest rate. So the price is fixed. You remember? This is so important. Okay. Output remains fixed, and price remains fixed. So can you see that long, bloody, painful price adjustment is not necessary. Or if you I told you, in reality we do everything, okay? Here, I assume that, you can assume that, sorry, okay. So tax cut, is that right? Right size tax cut. That's the problem, okay? That goes to, so, okay, Y is the same. Consumption is what? Anybody? Consumption is what? You see, we have two things here. People are pessimistic, so consumption goes down, but by tax cut, disposable income goes up. It looks like C is ambiguous. We said up. Anybody else? Right size tax cut. Okay. Suppose we are not sure. Remember my trick is what? Forget what consumption, because I don't know what happens to this. So G is what? G is the same, is that right? Because I didn't change G. What happens to investment? Investment is the same. Why investment is the same? Because interest rate remains the same. So what happens? Consumption must be the same. So you see here, that's the issue. First of all, remember I said right size tax. So here consumption is under two forces. Number one, consumer sentiment goes down. Number two, so this has negative impact, and you give people tax cut, this goes up. So overall, it looks like consumption is ambiguous, because tax cut tends to increase consumption, consumer pessimism. So, but remember, if you apply right size tax, these two cancel each out. These two cancel each out. How do I know? Because right size G is fixed, Y fixed, output fixed, therefore consumption must be fixed. But the trick is what? Right size tax. If you apply wrong size tax, no. Depends on if your tax is too little or too big, you can go either way. Okay? Budget deficit, unfortunately, factor. But the good thing here is price is. And the third approach is expansionary monetary policy. Remember, everything policy, expansionary, you can apply. So how does that from graphical point of view? You see here? You increase money supply, so you shift an MGEB down such that right size. Again, that's the problem with policies. You don't know in practice what's the right size because you don't have nice graphs. Okay? So right size monetary policy keep economy at full employment. So output fixed, consumption goes down because people are pessimistic. So G is fixed, therefore investment has to go up. See that? See, how do I know investment goes up? Because interest rate goes down. Because interest rate goes down. And here, monetary policies don't keep interest rate fixed. Monetary policies, expansionary monetary policies shift, reduce interest rate. So reduce interest rate, therefore investment rises. Investment rises. So the good thing about monetary policies is that they don't cause deficit. They don't cause budget deficit. That's an advantage of monetary policies. And price doesn't change. That is the whole idea behind policy, stabilization policies, to keep output and prices fixed. Okay, guys, so far I only talked about shocks and policies are affecting demand side. You remember that? Aggregate demand shifted, IS and M shifted. But there are shocks that affect supply side. Supply side, okay? So, you see, supply side shocks. Your textbook doesn't study full-fledged supply side shocks, okay? Your book considers only simple supply side shocks. By simple, I mean it assumes that Y bar doesn't change. So I'm teaching another textbook downtown. In that book, so see, negative supply side shocks reduce Y bar capacity, economic capacity. For example, COVID, negative supply side shock was because factories were closed, is that right? Workers stayed at home. So what happened? So output capacity reduced. Okay? But your book doesn't consider that. That's why your book doesn't call them supply side shock. It calls them price shock. If production cost for any reason goes up, that affects supply side. Okay? Aggregate supply. Okay? So that's why your book calls them supply side shock. For example, bad weather. A flood. Have you seen that flood we had recently in few places? Destroys everything. So anything that increases production cost, hurts production, or labor unionization. So you know that Uber and Amazon workers have created unions in some areas in the US. So it means what? Now they get paid more. So it means from now onward, Amazon and Uber are not going to be as cheap as in the past. Okay? So anything that changes price level or new environmental regulations, Okay, so, or this one, price of oil. Have you seen that in news? They continuously talk about price of oil, yes? So why? Because price of oil, price of energy affects production cost. Because for everything you need energy. Is that right? So this is a very big deal. Or anything positive is if raw materials become cheaper, oil becomes cheaper, energy becomes cheaper. So, okay. So in your book, so by the way, stories I told you, stories don't matter. So anything that increases production cost or anything reduces production cost. Okay. So opposite each other. So for example, bad weather or flood. So what happens in short run? In short run, obviously, when production cost goes up, you have that predetermined price level goes up. Shifts up, I have to say. Shifts up. So you see, at high and also at these higher prices, firms cannot sell as much as they can. So can you say that actual output turns out to be less than full employment? And when price goes up, money supply is fixed, price goes up, supply of real money shrinks, all right? So that means an MGEB shifts up too. Is that right? So this is short run equilibrium. Okay, in short run, economy is in stagflation. This is called stagflation. Stagflation means what? Recession plus inflationary pressure. Prices are higher, recessionary pressure. Okay? So in short run, economy is in stagflation. Y is less than y bar. What happens in long run? In the long run, because output is below y bar, price start falling. So you go back to point B, and price is falling, and MGEB shifts back to its original level. Can you see that? So this is long run equilibrium. But don't forget that, I told you, your book assumes that y bar is fixed. Okay? But some shocks, y bar. So, in short run, prices of agricultural product rises, the stories don't matter. Okay? So the whole thing is price level goes up, production cost for any reason goes up, supply of real money shrinks, so people need liquidity. What do? They start selling bonds to get liquidity. Okay, so bonds become cheaper, so interest rate rises. When interest rate rises, so investment falls. Investment is part of planned expenditure. Planned expenditure. Okay, actually here I ran out of space, so mention here inventories. Inventories start going up, so output falls, consumption falls, unemployment rises. Yes, everyone? Yes.
So just to be clear, on the exam, if you were to say graph the effects of an adverse supply shock, you won't tell us, like, you just say adverse supply shock and we would know that the price level rises, right?
Yeah, yes, exactly.
There's no
So
explanation.
adverse price shocks, price goes up, yes.
Okay, we don't need any other details, that's just.
Generally, I may give you like a story to make the question more interesting, but that's what I'm saying. Don't get overwhelmed by the story. But you are right. I mean, at the end of the road, adverse supplies a price shock means just price goes up. Okay, so yeah, that's very important. There is. So price level issue goes up, goes down. All right. So in the long run, because we are in stagflation, it means recession. Output is below full employment, so price falls. Real money supply rises. People start buying bonds. You see, everything would be reversed essentially. price of bonds rises, output falls, interest rate falls, investment rises, planned expenditure rises. Guess you got this. Okay, here the same thing. Planned expenditure rises, so inventory levels fall. So output rises back to Y bar, on consumption rises, so unemployment falls back to U. Unemployment falls back to U. Yes, everyone? Okay, that was the end of chapter 12. Okay, so it means you need to watch for the quiz from chapter 12. Okay, so let's take a break. So let's come back 10:50. 10:50, and we start a new